I know, obviously, especially as a scientist, you want to follow the research as much as possible. I think, especially with training, a lot of experienced lifters, they just feel like something that they've seen in the research just doesn't connect with what they've found in reality. And maybe they're just an outlier or something. I'm just wondering if there's anything that you found in the research that with your many, many years of lifting, you just feel like maybe we just don't have it right. Like that the findings maybe just are not in line with what you see in person and in reality as a trainer and somebody who's trained others.
So I do. It's interesting. I think that the failure research, because we have a paper that's in review that's going to really reinforce this, but there does not seem to be much difference in training to failure or stopping a couple reps short of failure. And the data are what the data are, but
Right.
now I think I'll say the issue, and then I'll give you why I think maybe there's gaps. But in those who really are highly trained, I just think there is a benefit to having some failure training involved. Now, a couple of things with the literature that you have to take into account. Number one, there really is no research on very well-trained individuals. We have trained individuals,
Hmm.
but when I'm talking very well, I'm talking bodybuilders and people that are the difference between what we generally see in the research and what I would call a very well-trained lifter is different. And
Yeah.
also, there is nothing in the literature as yet on training to failure selectively versus basically all the research. Either they look at every set. Let's say there's four
Mm.
sets of squats. They'll either do four sets of squats to failure or four sets not to failure. Well, what about just doing the last set to failure and doing an RIR of two on or one to two on the other sets?
Right.
So I think those are things that potentially might confound. It's not a binary decision. You don't need to either train every set to failure or no sets to failure. You can
Right.
selectively train to failure. And based on my experience, that has been more the benefit to it, where it's done on a selective basis. And hey, still maybe it's an illusion, but the data, like I said, the data are what the data are. And the more that research comes out, it seems to keep reinforcing that there isn't a benefit. But I'm still skeptical for those.
Right.
And I still do recommend, it is something that I still, with people who are very highly trained, I do say for people who are intermediate trainees, certainly novice, that it's really not a big deal. But for
Right.
those who are highly trained, that adding in some failure sets and perhaps even some breakdown sets, drop sets can be effective.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example. I think having talked to a lot of really advanced trainees, I think many of them would agree with you. I asked John Meadows a similar question. I know you know him, and he really strongly believes that for advanced trainees, there's just something to really going all out. And almost every advanced bodybuilder I know seems to believe that. Now, I know some people could say that's kind of bro science, like you said, it's not what the research shows. But as much as I do like to be evidence based and research based, I also don't want to ignore when an entire group of advanced individuals say that something works for them. So,
Absolutely, and I think that is one of the real issues with what people, I think, miss the boat with. And I again have come from both sides of the fence. So I was a
right.
practitioner and a bodybuilder, and then went into academia. And I think those who just try to defer to research and say, "Hey, the research shows this, so we got to," well, you need to. People who are some people like John Meadows knows a thing or two about bodybuilding.
Yeah.
And there doesn't mean certainly that they can get it wrong. They're obviously everyone is biased in terms of
Right.
what they see from an anecdotal standpoint, and that's the beauty of research, is that it takes out biases. But on the other side of the fence, there are gaps in the literature. There are confounding issues. There are limitations in literature, and you need to have an understanding of both. You need to understand what these limitations are, and then also be skilled enough and astute enough as a practitioner to know what you see in the field and then try to even that out, balance
Right.
that.
Absolutely.